good to have you here today with me. I need to introduce myself. My name is Jerry Wildin, and I used to be a student here. I graduated in 1955, and I went to Gallaudet University for the deaf. And then I came back and taught here in the 1960s and taught for 40 years. I retired 15 years ago or so, I think. 16, something like that. And I work with the school museum. I'm the curator here. I don't know if you've ever been to the school museum. Any of you been to the museum here? Okay. The museum, second semester, hopefully everything will be more prepared for you to go and take a look around. The principal, Gretchen Spooner, asked me to give a talk. We're doing this actually once a month about the school's history. The school actually started in Boise in 1906, for your information, and it was a former public school called Central School, and it was built in 1883, and that was before Idaho actually became a state. And Idaho became a state in 1890. And then, so there were several years that there was no school for the deaf, and then in 16 years or so. And then they moved into that school in 1906. Now, about the blind, we did have a blind student, one blind student in the school at that time. His name was Orville Casey. And he was born in 1900, and he was about 6 years old when he started going to school. And he was the first student before other blind students finally came in. There was only one blind student at that time and 23 deaf students. And then for about 2.5 years, in December 1908, the school burned up. And started, I think, upstairs where the flagpole was connected to the building, and just started and burnt down. So it just was destroyed. And then they moved to a hotel, the De Lamar Hotel. And they stayed there for 2 more years. And then the governor at that time, his name was Frank Gooding. And if you go to the cafeteria, there's a really large picture of him right before you go into the cafeteria. It's up there, of Frank Gooding. Because it's named after him. This town was named after him. And he was the only governor in U.S. history that has a town named after him. Okay? He has a deaf nephew.
His nephew's name is Neil. And he went to school in Boise, but then came here once the campus was established here in Gooding. So after the fire, there was some discussion about where the new school would be. And there was an argument about whether it would be in Boise or whether it would be somewhere else. And Frank Gooding was about to finish his term. He only had another month left as governor when the fire happened. And so he had looked at this area in the hopes of starting a new town. And the governor's mansion, actually, he built the governor's mansion, and it's still there. It still exists. And that's in Shoshone, in Lincoln County. And so there was a decision to separate the 2 counties into Lincoln County and Gooding County, and I think that was in 1913. So you've seen the Lincoln Hotel, probably, named after Abraham Lincoln. And it was easy for that to get mixed up with Lincoln County and the Lincoln Hotel here, so they decided to separate the 2 counties into one named Lincoln and one named Gooding. So Frank Gooding decided to donate 20 acres, part of which we are standing on right here. The cottage areas, that was the beginning of the 20 acres that he allocated. So Weiser, which is another town north of Boise, was the other location where they were considering having the school for the deaf until Frank Gooding donated the land. So Orville Casey moved here to school, but there's no records of when he graduated. Back in those days, those old days, a student would leave at about the age of 15, leave school, and then go work on the farm. So that's kind of how things were back then, and there's no record of his graduation. Orville Casey did become in charge of the concessions at the state capitol, and that was on the first floor there in the Capitol building in Boise. He also worked as a dairyman as well for many years. And then in 1975, new buildings were built here on campus, and you can see a lot of those buildings are in existence now, and they're both for blind and deaf students. And there is one that's named the Casey Building, which is named after Orville Casey. So Orville Casey came here when he was 65 years old. He came back to visit, and he gave a short talk. He brought his wife of 52 years. So that's the history of the first blind student to attend the Idaho School for the Deaf and Blind. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Okay.
Okay.
When did Orville Casey die?
I don't know. I haven't found any records. I know he's passed away. He was in good health when he came here for his visit, but I think he passed away when he was in his 80s. I don't know what year that would be. But it's a good example of what a blind person can do.
Was there an operating farm here on campus at one time? No?
No. In Boise, there was a farm there in Boise. He was a concessionaire at the Capitol, and he worked as a dairy farmer, but I don't, he primarily lived in the Boise area.
No, I mean, at school here on the campus at school, was there a farm?
Oh, yes. Yeah, this was
Can
farmland.
you tell the kids about that a little bit?
Yeah, from as much as 20 to 60 acres was farmed. So Orchard Avenue, just back here, it was actually an apple orchard. So that was the perimeter of the farm. And then where the hospital is, that was pasture. So it was good for cows and cattle. This was good farmland for that. And there were many, many students who worked the farms. And there was a barn, there were various structures. And then in 1918 were the first blind students to graduate. They were Werner Ripplinger and Harold L. Yeamans. So those were the first two blind graduates, and they were in 1918, and I have a picture of them. This actually was Werner's sister, a picture that I'm holding right now, and she graduated in 1925. So just a short time after her brother did. And then in 1921 was the first female graduate, and that was Leona Baugus. She actually named the school magazine. It didn't have a name prior to that, and so the school asked the students to come up with ideas for the name, and she won a $5 prize for having the name that was chosen as the Optimist. And of course that name has been in existence for many years since then. And from 1921 to 1982 is when the magazine actually stopped being placed into production. Before that, it was every month, and then it became a less frequent publication. And I have almost 100% of all the copies of The Optimist. And I have found them all over the place. So you could read every single one of them if you wanted to.
Oh, I do. If it's
And-
mine, that is. Depending on if it's a soft back or ring back.
So, and then here in 1964, there was a reunion. And it was discovered that Leone never got her $5 that she won as the prize. So the principal at that time heard the story and sent a letter to her, a very nice letter. It's got some good humor in it. And there was $5 enclosed within it as well to finally give her her prize money.
And in 1925, Bertha Riplinger was the first blind student to go to Gooding College. Did you know that we had a college?
I didn't know.
No, I do.
Yeah. By the Family Dollar, that was part of the Gooding College. The Maverick, kind of right there. The money was donated by Frank Gooding to use the land there to establish a school, a college. And I'd say it lasted about 20 years under the Methodist Church. But then that was the end. The college, there's Albion College, and then the one here, and those were the only two in Idaho at that time. So there were many students who came here at that time as well. In 1934, another student, Harold S. Forbush, came. He was 12 when he came here. He became blind when he was 10. I don't know what happened, but came when he was 12. And was here for 5 years, and then went to Gooding High School and graduated. He was there probably actually in Gooding High School for a year or two, and then decided to go to public school in Sugar City, where he lived. That's my home there, Rexburg. And so he stayed there until he graduated, and graduated in 1942. And then he went to Southern branch of the University of Idaho. It was a Southern campus, and majored in law. And there are actually several people who majored in law that graduated from here. We have many people who have graduated from this school, deaf or blind, and are very successful. And then in 1949, that was the year he opened his law practice in Driggs, Idaho, near the Teton Mountains. And he was also involved with the Upper Snake River Valley Historical Society for many years. He was president for 3. And he actually happened to be a good friend of my dad's, who was also a member of that historical society. So they were very good friends. Now, with the information I have is not really in chronological order, but I'm doing my best. I have another one in 1949. Dallas Strobchine, and he was very tall, about 6'2" or so, and he had no eyes at all, sightless. He used dark glasses, and he went to Gooding High School. He walked over there without a cane, actually. He would use his ears and knew where to go somehow. Very impressive. And it's amazing. I know that there's just a few people that can do that. I'm trying to think of where the whole old high school was at that time. The Stampede Burger. It was across the street from that. And he walked there every day without a cane and back. And as a freshman, he was the most outstanding freshman, voted the most outstanding freshman. And one time, there was another person named Glenn who went to the same high school. He was a hearing boy. And so Dallas was walking on the sidewalk, and this guy was being quiet, and Glenn said, and then Dallas said, "Hi, Glenn." He identified him by walking. The way he walked, he was able to say, "Hi, Glenn, how you doing?" Just by the way he walked. And then he graduated from Gooding High School with high honors. And he was named the top 7 in a superior class of graduates and received a 4-year scholarship to Gonzaga College in Spokane, Washington, and became a lawyer. And then in the 50s, I'm not sure of what year, but have you ever heard of the singing group, the Three Blind Men of Alabama? Anybody know that one? Anybody familiar? No? 1950s. Anyway, at that time, they sang together, and they went to the Alabama School for the Blind and Deaf. And they, when they got together, they loved music, they loved singing, and were very talented. But I don't know what instruments they used, but they became very famous, and they were called the Three Blind Men of Alabama.
Then in 1959, there was a blind wrestling team. And I'm not sure exactly when it started and when it ended, but it was a team that was together for about 15 years. And when they started a wrestling match, they would both stand across from each other. And when you're blind as a wrestler, you grasp the back of each other's necks. And they actually have a trophy that they won. And I have it here on the table. There were 4 of the wrestlers who won at district. Their names were Lee Robinson, Bob Karen, Lonnie Johnson, and Eugene Schaefer. Bob Karen and Eugene Schaefer got second in the state at the wrestling tournament. And they have various classes. One of them was class in the 137-pound class. And they won, they had 9 wins and 1 loss as their record. So very good. Robinson won 9 and lost 3. Schaefer was 5-5. And the coach at that time was named Floyd Gerke. And he was blind as well. He was a house parent. And so he also coached wrestling, and he was very good at wrestling. I would say he was at least 6'1". I mean, I'm 6 feet, and so he was 6'1" or something like that, and was just a really good wrestling coach. He ended up moving away, but at his time here, he helped them win quite a few awards. And then after we finish with the talk, you can come up here, and there's several trophies. There's 1 from bowling, 1 from wrestling, and then a 3rd as well. There's actually 25 different trophies and plaques and awards that were won by various blind students at different times within the history of the school. Are there any questions that have come to mind so far? Anything anybody wants to say? Okay, so I was a teacher here as well as my wife. I was also a basketball coach. And there were 2 blind players that were on the team. They were Gladys Papsy and Anna Louise Kamek. And they were on the starting lineup of the basketball team. There was another girl by the name of Elsie Heselton, and she also played on the team. And then in 1962, we actually had the highest number of blind students enrolled at the school. That was 40 students. How many do we have right now? How many do we have, Gretchen?
We include special needs, blind, probably about 20. this year, maybe 20.
Okay. 20 students. Well, in 1962, there were 40 blind students enrolled at the school, so a very good number. And in 1966, one of those students, Wanda Lloyd, she had a beautiful singing voice. And she was very well known throughout southern Idaho, as well as in other states. She went to Brigham Young University, BYU, and continued to sing there. And I don't know where she is now. I don't know where she is these days. And then in 1972, there was Terry Glenn Turner, who was a very good basketball player.
And at that time, oh wow, it was a very strong team, one of the best teams in school history. They were just so good. And there was one game, I forget what we were playing against, what school, but there was a hearing player, and he was bad-mouthing one of the deaf players, just saying things. And Terry became upset, and he, just couldn't believe he was insulting the deaf player, because the deaf player didn't know. And so, and they didn't realize he was deaf blind, so, and that he could hear, that he was blind. And so he just went and thumped that guy and knocked him to the floor. And the ref actually didn't say a word about it, and didn't say anything because he heard it, and so he was okay with it. And after that, that guy had nothing to say. Then in 1961, Lee Warren Robinson, he was actually an Eagle Scout. And very tall and on the basketball team. He was a district champ in wrestling and also the co-captain of the team. Then he became principal and assistant superintendent of ISDB. And then he moved to Utah and was the assistant superintendent or superintendent of the Utah School for the Deaf and the Blind there. Then in 1927, I have a picture here of this lady, Emma Johnson, and she lived on, I think, 14th Street, a couple blocks, and she would always come in a car. They brought her, or she came here, and then she taught Braille and music in the blind department for 17 years. She couldn't walk alone. She couldn't use a cane. She had somebody guide her, but she was a wonderful teacher. And she graduated in 1927 with her brother Oscar. They graduated together. I don't know if they were twins, I don't know, but Oscar and Emma Johnson, they graduated together. Then in 1959, okay, wait, 1930s, there was Clarence Hewick and Frank W. Collins. They were probably the first Eagle Scouts in this school back in the 1930s. Let's see who else. Then in 1932, another person, J.E. Hill, he graduated. He went to school here, and started in 1920, and continued here, and then graduated from Hanson High School, not far from here. I'm not sure what year that was, but I know he started here in 1920 and then graduated. And he became a professional musician. He had a record shop. He had a magazine subscription service, a gift and letter shop, owned a studio to teach organ and piano. He was a businessman. He was the president of the Twin Falls Junior Chamber of Commerce in 1946 and received a Distinguished Service Award. So, very successful. And then in 1929, Charles T. Collins, he graduated from the University of Idaho, actually, and he came to school here with a younger brother, Charles and Frank, Chuck. And in 1948, he was part of a radio show and had a program that was called the Chuck Collins Calling, CCC. And he performed in other radio stations as a pianist, a songwriter, father of folk. He was also the father of folk singer Judy Collins of New York City, and had.
Do you guys know Judy Collins at all? Have you heard of her?
Famous when I was a teenager.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what's her? Yeah.
Yeah. Folk singer, just.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
His older brother was Frank T. Collins, who was a blind piano tuner and graduated in 1931 from ISDB. So I'm wondering, any questions at this point?
in 1931, there was another person named Jesse Anderson he has an impressive record. He graduated in 1931. He went to college in Rexburg, my hometown, for 2 years, and that was Rick's College. And then in 1939 and 1940, he represented the Bonneville County as a member of the Idaho State Legislature. So a great person. He served on education, counties, prison, institutes, and library committees. So a very involved congressperson. He then moved to Ogden, Utah, and became the editor of a publication for the blind, which was under the Church of the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For 25 years, he was a member of the Utah Library Commission and was chairman of the Governor's Committee for the Visually Handicapped. So a very great person. In 1962, Bob Karen, who was one of those wrestlers I talked about a little bit earlier, he was second in state in wrestling. He was picked in 1965 as the ambassador from Idaho to represent the Idaho Society for Crippled Children and Adults in Denmark. And in 1966, he graduated from the University of Idaho and did so in the top 10 to 20% of his class of College of Education. He was also an accomplished clarinetist, pianist, organist, and accordionist. And he also had a baritone voice. He was a baritone solo. He did teach here at ISDB for a few years, and I don't know where he is now. So what's important to know about the history of blind students here at ISDB is that you are capable of doing many things, just like the deaf students who are here and who graduate from this school. I think you're very fortunate to be at this school. It's a good school where you can all be together. We can share our interests and our knowledge. And this is a very good program for the blind with a lot of equipment. And I have to say, it's much more impressive than my time. So these days, there is all kinds of technology that's available to you. I think it's important that you, as high school and middle school students, realize that you need to plan for your future and think about that. As a blind person, you can do anything you want to do and find that success. It's a lot of work, and it's something you have to pay attention to the adults and the people that are here at the school guiding you in that. And you have to behave yourselves. So that's all I have. But there's time left for you to come up to the table where I have various objects, one of which I'm holding in my hand right now.
Hold on one second, okay?
Okay,
You
sit
sit
down
down
for
on
just a
this
second.
side.
Yep, okay. I'm just going to talk about this object I'm holding in my hand, which is a record. It's called a square record, and it's for square dancing.
The blind people have everything, is what I say.
Thank you, Dave, I never would have looked there. I mean, I walked down there, but I didn't.
Another object that is up at the table when you come a little bit later to check them out is it's from a letter jacket with the I. It's actually the letter I. And it's taken off of a letter jacket, which someone would have once they earned it as part of the sports that they did. And this one is actually for wrestling. So there's various objects up on the table for you to check out. So go ahead and feel free to come do that. There's some pictures at the front of it, framed pictures. And then there's trophies towards the back of the table and other objects in the middle. Okay? Competition with other deaf and blind students. And that's where they won that bowling.
They're wearing glasses, most of them are wearing glasses, smiling, and here's an award that has South Idaho. Dang. There's just a whole bunch of put together.
What's this?
It's a wrestling.
Otherwise, they have to call.
Maybe that's not.
Yeah, I think like this time, they are both blind and they were the only graduates. That's what he said.
We had that, remember Hillary
And here.
Day?
Oh, yeah.
They're the only
Yeah,
graduates.
yeah, right.
Okay, we need to tell Mr. Am I gonna watch?
Thank you.